This week, going into the end of the transfer market, you kind of hope that the management at Celtic would have been sitting with their feet up, with a nice smirk on their face, fully in the knowledge that they're going into the Champions League draw on Thursday, and we're going to talk about the teams that we could possibly get in the Champions League. But let's face it, there's going to be a lot of work to get done this week. And Brendan Rodgers did come in and say right at the start, let's get to work. And it feels like they haven't got to work. It feels like they're still running around trying to get transfers in. That has been said, it could be up to five transfers coming in this week. One is already on the way in the door. And the Honduran star, Luis Palma, will sign a long-term contract. And he's been earmarked to fill the void left by Jota. We'll see if that is to be the case or not. The fact that he's only 23-year-old, he could go straight into the team and make his debut against the Rangers and the Glasgow Derby this weekend. Before that, we need to get more players in, because let's face it, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Rocky, are out for 2 months. Stephen Welsh, he could be missing for up to 4 months after having to get surgery on his ankle. Southampton stopper, we broke the news last night on the live. If you missed the live, you missed a cracking live. He's decided to go off to Qatar. And Kieran Tierney, there was never any chance of Kieran Tierney coming to Celtic because we couldn't afford his wages. And let's face it, when a team in Spain comes calling, you've got a choice of playing Motherwell, Kilmarnock, Ross County, Hibs away, or you can go to Spain and you can play the 19 other teams in the Spanish league and with a nice weather. I know where I would rather be. Anyway, let's move on from that. The recruitment team are going to have their work cut out. There are players that have to be put out the door this week. We have to come to some kind of conclusion with their deals. We have to either pay off the end of their contracts. One, Albion Ajeti, we need to pay off his contract and get him out the door. Celtic did make him an offer, and I think it was for about 50% of his remaining contract they wanted to pay off, but he wants more than that. So he's playing hardball, he's ready to sit. But as it stands, we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see if the board manage to come up with squad-ready players. And I think the fact that we haven't brought a player in since after the Kilmarnock defeat and in the Cup, we are now at a stage now where, it is not ideal. It is not ideal, and especially the week of the Champions League draw. So now let's talk about the Champions League draw. Let's talk about the teams that we could possibly get. Don't spit out your morning breakfast or coffee just yet. And some of the teams that we could get. And this is teams that have already qualified for the Champions League as it stands at the moment. Obviously, there are games still to be played this week. We'll talk about them after the ones that have qualified. So obviously in England, you've got Man City, you've got Arsenal, you've got Manchester United, and you've got Newcastle United. It won't be fun if you've got Newcastle United in the Champions League. In Spain, you've got Barcelona, you've got Real Madrid, you've got Atletico Madrid, you've got Real Sociedad, which Kieran Tierney has just went to, and Sevilla. So you've got Seville, and it's going to be, you can guarantee we get Newcastle United and Real Sociedad. And then throw in Union Berlin if our player that we sent there is still there. Anyway, in Germany, we've got Bayern Munich, we've got Borussia Dortmund, we've got RB Leipzig, and Union Berlin. Italy, we have Napoli, Lazio, FC Inter, and AC Milan. You've got Inter Milan and AC Milan. And France, you've got Paris Saint-Germain and Lens. It's interesting that the French only get 2 teams into the Champions League. In Scotland, that's the big one. Got the champion Celtic straight into the Champions League. Could bring a tear to a glass of high. Anyway, in Portugal, you have Benfica, and then you have Porto. That are straight into the Champions League. In the Netherlands, you have Feyenoord. Feyenoord are right into the Champions League. And then in Serbia, you've got Red Star Belgrade. Austria, you've got RB Salzburg. And one that's kind of weird for me, even though it's a war zone, you've got Shakhtar Donetsk as in the Champions League, even though it is a war zone. But we won't talk about that. There's enough Ukrainians kicking about here to fill the hole. I better cut that out. So yeah, that's the ones that have already qualified for the Champions League. There are games still playing this week. Maccabi versus Young Boys. That game is still 0-0. Antwerp versus AEK Athens. Antwerp are winning 1-0 in that game. Rosko Trzaskewsko from Poland versus Copenhagen. Copenhagen are ahead in that game. Molde versus Galatasaray. Galatasaray are only winning 3-2 on that one. So, but then the next leg is in Galatasaray, so you expect them to go through. The big one for me is obviously the new Rangers versus PSV Eindhoven. When you look at the score lines that PSV have had recently at home, you would tip them to go through. You would actually tip them to go through. It is 2-2 from the first leg, but when you look at the aggregate score from the previous round was about 7. So I would expect PSV to go through. Then you've got Sporting Braga. Braga against Panathinaikos. Braga are actually winning 2-1 for that one. So that are the teams that are... I mean, who do you fancy from then? And everyone's going to say none of them, because we can't even beat the teams in the SPFL. Never mind teams in the Champions League. Look, I think when it goes into the Champions League, I think hopefully we will play a bit better. Hopefully we will get the 4 or 5 players it's been suggested that we'll go for this week. There's one already on the way in the door. Has been suggested that we're going to go for another 4. If we get another 4, and I think what's my understanding and reading between the lines of what's actually going on at Celtic, there's obviously been a list of players handed forward to Brendan Rodgers, and they're more prospect players. And hence the reason that Brendan said after the game at the weekend, he said, look, we need first team ready players. We need experience. We need players in the age bracket of 28. We don't need more players to come in that are age 23. And we've been linked with other players, and there's no use even going on about them because it's just people trying to make headlines. And the fact that we've been linked with younger players again this week, if we do sign players that are younger and don't have any kind of experience going into the Champions League, it'll just be an absolute sheesh show, as they say. Anyway, I fancy Napoli. We fancy a really good game at Napoli. Lens, maybe. Trip to the Netherlands to play Feyenoord. The teams that are already in it. Definitely I'd love to get Real Sociedad. They've drew their first 3 games in Spain this season. So, but, it's just one of those things. Could we get Newcastle United? Could Eddie come back to haunt us? Could Kieran Tierney come back to haunt us? Union Berlin? Could Josip Juranovic come back to haunt us? That's all to be said. The draw will be live this Thursday. I think it might go live for the draw as it is announced. And then I'll swiftly come off it in case I have to book any flights. You never know. We might get to a Champions League game this year away from home. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. There is one player that is due to sign for Celtic in the next couple of days. Has been confirmed by his parent club. The Lewis Palma is coming to Celtic. It just all depends when Celtic decide to release that information. Or maybe they're going to keep him and try and get another 4 in the door before then. Maybe they're going to try and ship some players out. You never know. On that note, have a great day, Celtic fans all around the world.
Lit. Roll up to the party. Roll up to the party. Roll up to the party.